All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of D&D Deep Dive, the show where we dive deep into classes, subclasses, and other features of 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons to help you get the most out of your choices. So, today, you may notice something different, like the entirety of my background has changed. Well, I have moved. But because of that, my entire setup has actually changed. I moved my monitors around so that they fit into the new space. Because of that, I can no longer leave my webcam on my monitor. I have a different lighting setup because I'm in a different room and things like that. And I actually can put lights where I want them. Whereas my last one, the desk was right up against a wall. And so anyway, it means that for a little bit, it's going to be a little strange. Things are going to be changing as I experiment with new things. Acoustically, this area is much different than my last one, and that is going to mean that I'm probably going to be, as I have the energy and the money, most of all, going to be making some modifications. So yeah, things are going to be weird. If the audio sounds weird, let me know in the comments, but understand there's not a ton I can do about it yet. We're still moving into this place. It was a very, very chaotic move in general, just because of how everything just happened to work out. So yeah. Otherwise, let's go ahead and continue with our races from the player's handbook, and then at the end, I might have something cool to announce. So anyway, I have saved the two most complicated races for the last. So this week we are going to be covering the elf. Now, elves are one of those classic D&D races that are just or classic fantasy races. They are in every single every single fantasy type thing. They're in Star Trek. Have you ever wondered who the Vulcans are? The Vulcans are elves. They're space elves, but they're elves. Because of that, because there is so much lore about elves, and elves themselves have shown up in history and in mythology often, to the point where we have multiple different versions of elves. So because of that, elves, just in the PHB, elves are technically the most complicated race in there. Because unlike the other races that have sub-races, they have 3 sub-races instead of two. Once you go outside of the PHB, I'm going to count right now. There are 13 different sub-races of elves. There are as many sub-races of elves as there are classes in all of Dungeons and Dragons. There's a lot of customizability built into elves in general. They really can be just about anything because of how 5th edition is built, so that you don't technically have to have racial bonuses in the attributes that are most important to your class, and you can still have a great character. And the fact that so many of these elves have different attributes and things like that. So yeah, they're super hyper customizable, very interesting. People like elves in general. I mean, the entire reason Orlando Bloom has a career was because everyone loved Legolas. Yeah, that, and he's really pretty, which is an elven thing. As a reminder, we're just covering the PHB ones. I'm not going to go through all 13 because that would be a 4-hour long video. Yeah, let's go ahead and dive into Elves. Now, quick reminder about how races work in 5th edition D&D. Every race is going to have an ability score increase. Generally, you're going to get 2 ability scores that increase. If the race does not have a sub-race, you will get them all right at the top of the trait section of the race. If it does have a sub-race, like the elf, you will get half of it at the top of the race, and then the other half you will get from your sub-race. So your ability score increase can vary drastically among the different sub-races. In addition to that, you're going to have age, alignment, size, and speed. Just basic stuff that gives you more kind of background and role-playing stuff for your character. If your race has dark vision, will be listed there. And then you have your unique racial traits that are unique to that race. And generally, if there are sub-races, you will have unique traits to the race itself, and then you will also have at least 1 or 2 unique traits to the sub-race. So that being said, let's start with the elf and their ability score increases. So ability score increase for all elves is Dexterity. When you think of like classic elf characters, the Elven Ranger is by far the most popular. Legolas was an Elven Ranger. The actual build of the actual builds that are kind of built around elves are kind of built around being able to emulate Legolas. Long before Legolas on film was even a thing. I mean, this is going back to the late 70s. Yeah, so Elven Rangers are by far the absolute most classic thing you can find for an elf. However, there are a lot of classes that benefit from Dexterity. My personal favorite character I've played, Aether, is a Wood Elven Shadow Monk. Because Dexterity is super, super great for monks. Elven Rogues work really, really well. Elven Fighters work exceptionally well, especially when we talk about some of the subclasses. Eldritch Knight High Elves are absolutely brilliant because of some of the traits that you get as a High Elf. In addition to that, depending on your sub-race, literally elves can be just about every class if you want to do it. There are elves that get charisma bonuses, so sorcerers and warlocks work well. High elves are very, very well known for being wizards, and that also works just about as well for artificers. Really, the only class that you generally don't see elves playing is the barbarian, simply because I don't believe there is a single variant that actually gives you a strength bonus. And because things like the half-orc exists, there are things that just make you a more powerful barbarian, and there's so many other choices for the elf that you just don't tend to see it a lot. That being said, if you wanted to be an elf barbarian, the extra dexterity bonus is going to be helpful because it'll increase your AC. And again, you don't have to have a bonus to your strength score. You can start with a 15 strength, and then at level 4, when you pick up your either ability score improvement or feat, instead of getting just an ability score improvement, you only need 1 point to get to 16. You can choose a feat that also ups your strength score and be able to do something extra with it to just make your character that much more interesting and fun to play. So yeah, the absolute quote unquote perfect class for the elf really it doesn't exist. They're such a versatile race, depending on the sub race that you choose, that you can't really have like a perfect class for them. However, the most kind of traditional and the most popular up until fifth edition, because it was broken when it first launched, is the Elven Ranger. And now that there are Tasha's new alternate things, optional traits for the Ranger, and there are other Rangers as subclasses that exist. You can play an Elven Ranger really, really well. Oh, another really popular Elven Ranger I should probably mention is Drizzt. Is an Elven Ranger. Dark Elven, but Elven. So yeah, Dexterity is useful for everything, and you can do anything as an elf. Age. Elves are extremely long-lived. An elf typically claims adulthood and an adult name around the age of 100 and can live to be 750 years old. So they reach physical maturity about the same age as humans. So it's not like they look like teenagers until they are 100. No, at 16 they're going to look like a 16-year-old human. At 25 they're going to look like a 25-year-old human. However, they specifically state here the elven understanding of adulthood goes beyond physical growth to encompass worldly experience. So elves don't consider themselves adults until they have the experience necessary to justify that title of adulthood. Yeah, so I believe as far as the PHB is concerned, the elves are the longest lived race. So playing, especially if you're an quote unquote older elf, 300, 400, 500 years old, it can be fun to kind of have that, oh, you're so young aspect to dealing with other players. It can also be very annoying very quickly. So make sure you can read the room, and if oh, you're so young, this starts to get annoying, you can drop that long enough for it to not be annoying again. But yeah, you can do some cool stuff with a race that lives that long. Quite literally, an elf could have had an entire lifetime of a career before becoming an adventurer. So unlike maybe a human where their background was artisan and they were a baker, so they were a baker maybe for 20 years. They were a baker for a long time, and then they just felt that they needed to go out and do something different. An elf could have been a master baker for 150 years before deciding to become an adventurer, and have an entire other life to kind of draw story from. There's so much you can do with a character that has lived that long. They might have had multiple careers before him. Doesn't mean you get to pick multiple backgrounds, because that would unbalance the game. But it does mean that you can reference some pretty interesting things. There's a possibility that you could be a great grandfather or grandmother before you even pick up your first sword. And that can be really fun and interesting. Alignment we ignore because it doesn't mean anything. Size range from under 5 feet to over 6 feet tall. They're relatively the same height as humans, though in some lore they can, like in Athos, which is Dark Sun, they are actually shorter than humans, and then if you look more like Middle Earth style elves, they're all tall and beautiful. So you can choose how you want your elf to be, but generally they're relatively similar to humans. And their size is medium, so like every other race. And then their base walking speed is 30 feet. So very simple average. Again, there's a good reason why elves are one of the most popular races in the PHP, right behind humans. And it's because they get most of the good stuff and the average stuff without a whole lot of downside, and then they have all those different sub races you can choose from. So dark vision, yes. Elves have dark vision up to 60 feet, so kind of your standard dark vision. We will see, once we start talking about sub races, we will see our actual first variation into the dark vision, which is kind of fun. But yeah, simple stuff. Dark vision, as I've said many times before, dark vision is very useful. It is not the be all end all. So don't feel bad if the race you choose doesn't have dark vision built in. There's tons of ways to get it if you want it, and there's tons of ways to get around it if you don't want it. So yeah, that goes for the kind of common stuff. Now for the elf unique racial traits. The first one they have is keen senses, which gives you proficiency in the perception skill. Perception checks are the most common checks you will make in the entire game. You are constantly making perception checks, whether it's looking for information, trying to figure out what's around you. Like it's just very, very common. Trying to hear what someone is saying, eavesdropping on a conversation. There's so many different uses for perception. And things like if someone is trying to stealth up past you, they will use your passive perception. Being trained in proficiency is very, very useful because it raises your passive perception. One of the parties I DM'd, it was actually a family that played together at conventions. It was mother, father, and two daughters. And they always played together at conventions. And because of that, they had... their party was nearly perfect as far as how it worked together. And... yeah, their cleric had a passive perception of like 21 or to 22. And I think had the alert feat. So it was almost impossible to sneak up on their party at all because their cleric would always know and always to tell people as soon as it happened. So yeah, teamwork and working together can be super, super powerful. Especially when one of the parents was a DM. So kind of helped his kids min-max their characters. But they were fun. So yeah, keen senses, kind of useful. Fay Ancestry. This is another one that has actually been a part of the Elven race since, like, I think 2nd edition, when Elf changed from being... a class, back in original D&D, Elf was a class, not a race. By 2nd edition, they were an actual race, and they've always had this thing called Fay Ancestry, which basically meant they were really difficult to use charm magic on, and they were resistant to magical sleep. In 5th edition, gives you advantage on saving throws against being charmed, and magic can't put you to sleep. There's in 5th edition, there's a couple spells that will cause you to fall asleep. They're remarkably limited, and they don't... they're not that useful. Most of them require you to roll dice, and then you can affect the hit points of that many creatures. So let's say there's 3 creatures on the field that you want to put to sleep, and they each have 50 hit points up a piece, to use easy numbers. If you roll and you get, let's say, let's do 25 hit points apiece, so it's slightly easier. So you roll, and you roll 57 is the total that you rolled using your dice, which is an extremely high roll for a sleep spell. You have to cast that at like level 6 to get that high. It's one of the reasons you don't get a lot of sleep spells cast. you would be able to put 2 of them to sleep because you would have 25 hit points for one, 25 hit points for this second. The third one, though, you only have 7 hit points, and you have to have more points than they have hit points at that point. So you would be able to put to sleep 2 of the 3, and that's why it's not really used that much. Simply because you generally have to weaken monsters for it to actually do anything, and sleep is not that bad a status condition. It's not that bad. You can wake up relatively quickly from it. So, Charmed, on the other reason, is a nasty one. Charmed can do everything from making you not be able to attack someone or have to make saves in order to attack someone, things like that, all the way up to you lose complete control of your character and the bad guys get to use you as another character. So having advantage against being charmed is incredibly useful, especially if you're fighting fey creatures in general. Love to use charms, and vampires. Vampires are super good at using charms, and they can charm you into letting them bite you, which takes away your max hit points and heals them. So it's very, very useful to not have to worry about that. The next feature of Elves, and this is probably the most misunderstood of any of the racial traits. It's called Trance. Trance is basically... it says here, elves don't need sleep. Instead, they meditate deeply, remaining semi-conscious for 4 hours a day. While meditating, you can dream after a fashion. Such dreams are actually mental exercises that have become reflexive through years of practice. After resting this way, you gain the same benefit that a human does from 8 hours of sleep. A lot of players will treat this as, oh, I can do a long rest in 4 hours. No, you can't. A long rest is 8 hours, no matter how much you're asleep during that time. Humans and all the other races that don't use trance actually only need to sleep 6 hours. And then the other 2 hours, they can do light activities like standing watch. Elves cannot get a long rest in 4 hours. They have to take 8 hours to get the benefits of a long rest. They're just conscious for 4 of those hours, and that means they can stand watch for 4 hours or do little prep work or other things like that don't require a lot of effort in order to still get their 8 hours. That being said, trance can be super useful. Again, if you are conscious, it's significantly more difficult to surprise or ambush you. Doesn't mean it's impossible. It means it's more difficult. Having someone that can take extra watches can also be beneficial for a number of things. Having 2 or 3 people on watch instead of just one can be very, very useful. So yeah, there's a lot of benefits to trance. However, the one that most players think, oh, I can do a long rest in 4 hours, doesn't exist. It's not a real thing. A long rest is 8 hours, and you can only have one long rest in a 24-hour period, no matter how long it takes you to take that long rest. It's how the rules work. So yeah, min-maxers in general will argue until they're blue in the face. No, it means I can do 4 hours, and that means I can, use one and done abilities, 3 times a day because I just need 4 hours to do it. No, try again. And then the final one, languages. They speak, read, and write Common and Elvish. Big shock. So, the 3 sub-races in the PHB are the High Elf, the Wood Elf, and the Dark Elf, also known as the Drow. We are going to start with the High Elf, which the High Elf is actually one of my favorites because of one of the things that they could get. High Elves, to kind of explain the difference, High Elves are generally the more kind of howdy, the kind of loftier elves. They tend to be a little bit more associated with magic and intelligence, wizards, and the things like that. A lot of people role play them as looking down their noses at everyone. Thank you, phone or tablet or whatever that was. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different things. The high elves in the D&D are very, very magic oriented, and you'll see why in a second here. For the ability score increase, your intelligence score increases by 1. So high elves, traditionally they are wizards, and they make phenomenal wizards. We'll talk about the reason why in a second here, but they are just super good at being wizards. However, again, intelligence can be used for a lot of different things. First of all, artificers are a thing, and they are intelligence dependent. So going artificer can be really good. Again, Eldritch Knight fighters are really great when they're high elves, because you can be a dex based fighter. So you use finesse weapons instead of strength based weapons, which for an Eldritch Knight works perfectly. And you can use the dexterity and the intelligence and the other cool stuff that you get with this. So in addition to that, again, if you want to go the rogue route, there's the magic casting rogue that I can't think of right now. Arcane trickster, there we go. And really, intelligence can be useful for any number of classes, but generally, most high elves you see are going to be wizards, artificers, Eldritch Knight fighters specifically, though you can be any kind of fighter with a high elf, and arcane trickster rogues are really popular for that. The next thing they get is elf weapon training, which gives you proficiency with longsword, short swords, short bow, and longbow. Now, this used to be, in previous editions, this was a base elf trait. All elves got elf weapon training. Now, it's only some of the sub races have it. But again, just like the dwarven weapon proficiency we talked about, most people think, well, if I'm going to use those, I'm going to be, a fighter that uses a longsword. They already have that. This is a wasted proficiency. And again, no. If you want to be a really interesting wizard, be a wizard that casts out of using your longsword. Again, there is a magic item. It's a common magic item. It's a little stone that you put on a weapon. It allows you to use the weapon as your casting focus. It's really cool, especially since elves get that bonus to dexterity. If you had a finesse sword, a short sword works perfectly for this. You could use your short sword and be able to do melee stuff when you need to, and then go back at a range and shoot stuff at them using your sword. Be Link. Be able to mix it up there in the middle of everything with a short sword, and then go back and blast people with blast from your sword. Super cool stuff. The next thing they get is called Cantrip, and it's exactly what it sounds like. One cantrip of your choice from the wizard's spell list. Intelligence is your spellcasting ability for it. Yeah, this is massively useful. First of all, wizards have the largest spell list of any class, and getting a free cantrip is awesome. Now, again, cantrips are spells that you can cast over and over and over again. And there are so many different uses for it. If you want to take more of an aggressive cantrip, if you let's say you are going a fighter, but you wanted to be a battle master for a fighter instead of an Eldritch Knight, so you're not going to have any access to magic. You're going to be a melee fighter, but every so often you need a ranged attack. You can take the firebolt cantrip or any of the other kind of attacking cantrips and use that in order to have a ranged attack without having to switch weapons or anything like that. Again, especially if you get that magic item that lets you cast from your sword, you can just go and shoot your beam of fire while you're doing other stuff. You can also use it for more utility things. I know a lot of people that will do Mage Hand just so they have the force. They can pick up stuff from far away. Prestidigitation can be a lot of fun. Also things like Chill Touch. Chill Touch prevents creatures from regaining hit points for it to turn effectively. So being able to stop a troll from regaining hit points at low levels when you may not have access to fire spells or acid damage can be really, really useful. And any creature with a regeneration that Chill Touch is going to be massively useful for. So, yeah. Choose your cantrip well. Base it on the class that you're going to take, what's going to augment it the best. But there's just so many I could go through now that I'm just not able to do it. And then the final thing they get is an extra language. You can speak, read, write one extra language of your choice, which, again, feeds into that idea of them being very intellectual. They're multilingual. They already speak 2 languages. And all high elves speak 3 languages, just for fun. And again, your mileage will vary with languages, but in some campaigns, the more languages you know, the more powerful you are, because you can learn things that other characters don't want you to know, and so they'll try speaking another language thinking you can't understand them. So, yeah. So that is the High Elf. The next elf is stop it. The next flavor of elf is called the Wood Elf, and this is what Aether, my Shadow Monk, is. Wood elves are a lot more close to kind of your Legolas style elves. They live in the woods. They tend to be very natural and nature focused, and you'll see that with the stuff that they get. Their ability score increase, you get your wisdom score increased by 1. Again, because rangers use wisdom as their casting, your kind of very traditional elf is going to be a wood elven ranger. They get dexterity for their attack rolls. They get wisdom for their casting. It is exact, and it's nature the theme, so it fits everything in there. But wisdom can be massively useful for a number of classes. Clerics need wisdom for their casting. Druids use wisdom as their casting as well. Wood elven druids are incredibly common as well. Anything kind of nature focused tends to be really popular with wood elves. And then in my case, the monk. Monks need dexterity and wisdom. Wood elves give both of that. I have done so many awesome things. I cannot speak highly enough about wood elven monks. So yeah, technically there's a lot of different classes you can choose that are quote unquote the best with a wood elf. It's monks. I'm going to tell you right now, it's monks because I said so, because monks are awesome. Elf weapon training. Again, you get elf weapon training with this. It's the same thing, long sword, short bow, long bow. Use it how you will. The other kind of unique thing, and the thing that makes wood elves such awesome monks, is called Fleet of Foot. Fleet of Foot gives your base walking speed an increase to 35 feet. So wood elves are faster than all the other races. And if you combine that with the hypermobility of the monk, a max level wood elven monk can move 65 feet per turn. Using Step of the Wind, that turns into 110 feet, or 175. Or no, sorry, my math is wrong. That turns into 130 feet, or 195. There we go. 195 feet if you use both Step of the Wind and your dash. So almost 200 feet in a single round. They're massively fast. And can be a lot of fun. That extra 5 feet can be incredibly useful, even as just a ranger, for effectively kiting your opponents. If you're unfamiliar with the term kiting, it's actually a term that comes from MMOs. I first heard it used in EverQuest, and I believe that might be where the term originated. But basically what it was rangers in EverQuest could do what was called kiting, because what they could do is they had spells that would slow enemies down, and then they would run backwards attacking them, but they would always be far enough away from the enemy that the enemy couldn't attack back. So they would just get chased around shooting arrows at these guys until the enemy died, and made them very easy to solo content with. You see it in MMOs all the time. Kiting is a viable strategy depending on the MMO. And in D&D, kiting is a viable strategy. With just that additional 5 feet of movement, that means in general, you're going to be able to move yourself, even if they are standing toe-to-toe with you. You will be able to move yourself outside of their range so that they have to use their dash action to get up to you again. You might take an opportunity attack, but there are quite a few different things that can make opportunity attacks significantly more difficult to land. The Hunter Ranger actually has an ability they learn that gives all opportunity attacks against you have disadvantage. So if your choice is between the enemy having one opportunity attack, or especially at higher levels, being able to make 2 or 3 or 4 multi-attacks against you, take the opportunity attack, get just outside their range, and make them either choose a different target that can't keep running away from them, or kite them around the battlefield. It's really, really useful. And a lot of people just look at it and go, oh, 5 feet, who cares? It's a massive change to the action economy, just being able to move 5 extra feet and get out of most melee ranges. So the last thing they have is Mask of the Wild. You can attempt to hide even when you are only lightly obscured by foliage, heavy rain, falling snow, mist, or other natural phenomena. It basically means if they're in nature in some way and there is anything that makes it difficult to see them, doesn't blot them out completely, but does add some obstacles to it, they can take a hide action when others can't. Which again can be incredibly useful depending on how you use it. Being able to hide, most people only think of hiding as a rogue, the thing. They hide so they can get their sneak attack and blah blah. Only rogues can do it. No. Elves already have the bonus to dexterity. Stealth is a dexterity-based skill. So a hide check, you have to roll a stealth check against an enemy's passive perception or active perception, depending on this is a situation. So the hide check can be really useful for any for any class, even like a cleric or a wizard, being able to effectively just break line of sight. It doesn't mean they don't know where you are anymore. It means they can't see you clearly. Being able to break line of sight like that can help you to reposition. If they're completely unaware of you, you can move around and maybe get advantage on your next attack. If you're a fighter, that can be incredibly useful. Or if you're a barbarian, again, I said elves don't normally go barbarian. You go ahead and be a barbarian, unless you're a wood elf, and then you're always a monk. Being able to get that extra ability to crit can be super useful. And then obviously, rogues can abuse the hell out of that. So that is the wood elves. Sorry, this is going a little bit long, but as I said, elves are complicated. Finally, let's go to the dark elves, or the drow. Dark elves became super popular after Ari Salvatore started publishing the Drizzt books. If you're unaware of who R.A. Salvatore is, he's an author that writes Dungeons and Dragons, specifically Forgotten Realms novels that are set in the Forgotten Realms. And the original character he created is a dark elf ranger or drow named Drizzt. And he first appeared in, I want to say, is the Legacy of the Crystal Shard. I can't remember the name of the books. He's been in a ton of books. He's one of the most popular Forgotten Realms characters, right under Elminster, which is the character created by Ed Greenwood, who created Forgotten Realms. Elminster is his personal, almost personal insert into the setting. So yeah, he's super popular. And because he's super popular, drow went from being just elven bad guys to a race that is really steeped in lore and all these really interesting things. A lot of the lore R.A. Salvatore wrote himself. So yeah, they are very different from the other elves. First things first, for the drow, your ability score increase is charisma. Now, the interesting thing about drow and kind of the lore behind them, most drow worship, they live in the Underdark, and they worship the Spider Queen Lolth. She's a lesser deity, but she is a deity. And because of that, magic is a really big part of drow society in the Forgotten Realms. Clerics, which are generally called priestesses, are massively popular, which the charisma score doesn't really help with that, but it is what it is. Drow are also, at least Forgotten Realms drow are matriarchal. So the woman is the head of the household. It's one of the reasons that priestesses are so popular. They are the seat of power in drow society, and is generally limited to women. So that's another kind of unique aspect you can play as the drow, is coming from a matriarchal society and interacting with a lot of other societies that generally tend to be patriarchal. Can be a lot of fun. But that charisma increase does mean you can go warlock and sorcerer. Drow warlocks and sorcerers are unbelievably popular. They're really cool. They fit the lore of drow really well. Again, magic is a massive thing, to the point where we will talk about the fact that they have inborn magic abilities in a second here. But yeah, so those are always fun. Bards can also be a ton of fun to play as a drow, where you get to kind of combine the two aspects of drow society are kind of the weapons, specifically finesse-based swords. Short swords, scimitars, rapiers, the things like that are very common with drow. And then magic and bards blend both of those. Drow bards are really fun and interesting to play. The next thing they get is called Superior Dark Vision. This is the first time you see something different with Dark Vision, and their Dark Vision has a radius of 120 feet. So they have double the distance they can see in the dark. Now, I've mentioned this before, but if you're using darkness or dark vision where you're in complete pitch black, you can only see as far as your dark vision lasts. So for most characters, anything outside 60 feet doesn't exist as far as their vision. So if you have an enemy that's 65 feet away, they are invisible to you. For a drow, again, talking about that kind of kiting mechanic, you can stay outside of your enemy's dark vision, even with just your 30 feet movement, since they don't have the extra movement speed of the wood elf. you can stay outside of their dark vision and be able to lob spells and attacks from far away without them being able to see you or be able to counterattack at all. Most abilities require you to be able to see the enemy. So having that additional dark vision radius on your dark vision is massively useful. And using darkness effectively is a big part of being a drow. Because they live in the Underdark, they are born in darkness. Most drow never see the sun, the moon, anything like that. They live their entire lives in the Underdark. So all they know is darkness. So going on adventures during the night is a good thing for drow. Especially when we get to the next thing. Adventuring without lights or things like that tends to be really useful for drow. Especially since, again, they're going to be able to see the enemy long before the enemy can see them, because the vast majority of dark vision is only 60 feet. So use that to your advantage. The next thing they get is called sunlight sensitivity. This is the first negative racial trait, and some people really get upset about this. Some people don't. Again, it depends on the campaign that's being run. But sunlight sensitivity, you have disadvantage on all attack rolls and on wisdom perception checks that rely on sight when the target of your attack or whatever you're trying to perceive is in direct sunlight. Now, it doesn't say bright lights. It says direct sunlight. So you can be in a place that is bright light without having to deal with a sunlight sensitivity, which a lot of people misinterpret this as anytime you're not in dim light or darkness, you have disadvantage on all your attack rolls. And that's not it. You can have a drow holding a torch for the rest of the party and not have disadvantage on their attacks, because that is bright light, not direct sunlight. And that is something that you need to remember when you're dealing with drow, is the only thing you need to avoid is direct sunlight. If you can get them in the shade of a tree, they're no longer in the direct sunlight. If you can cast the darkness spell up in the sky so that it creates an area underneath the spell where there's not direct sunlight, you don't have to worry about that. There are so many ways around this, and so many people view this as, well, I'm just going to not use sunlight sensitivity because it makes drow unplayable. No, they're perfectly playable. You just have to understand, because they have 120 feet of dark vision, there has to be some sort of give to keep them balanced. The next thing you get is called drow magic. I mentioned magic's a big part of their society. They have built-in spells, very similar to the tiefling, just different spells. And all three of the spells are massively useful. The first spell you get is Dancing Lights with the cantrip. Cantrips in general are very useful. Dancing Light basically allows you to create these 4 torch-sized lights, which shed dim light in a 10-foot radius. This is super useful. Simply because you can create dim light instead of bright light. So for things like shadow monks, where they need dim light or darkness in order to do a lot of their abilities, you don't have to worry about it anywhere near as much, because you're only creating dim light instead of actual bright light. And it's a pretty small range. But when you can create 4 of them and basically stagger them, you can have a 10-foot long or a 40-foot long corridor that's 10 foot wide that is illuminated with dim light. And it can be really useful. So don't undervalue dancing lights. It's super nice. When you reach 3rd level, you can cast the Fairy Fire spell once with this trait and regain the ability to do so when you finish a little long rest. Fairy Fire is by far one of the most useful spells in the game, and so many people just ignore that it's a spell. It's a 1st level spell. It's concentration, unfortunately, but what it does is you cast it in an area. I think it's a 20-foot. Yeah, it's a 20-foot cube. Any creature within that 20-foot cube has to make a dex save. If they fail their dex save, they can't be invisible, and they give advantage to every attack roll against them for a minute. This is so useful. We talk about action economy all the time because of how important it is in 5th edition. Being able to give all of your allies advantage on all of their attack rolls is unbelievably useful. In addition to that, it's a one and done save. They don't get to make another save at the end of their turn. The only way Fairy Fire goes away is if you stop concentration or you lose concentration for whatever reason. So Fairy Fire is so awesome, and they get it built in at the 3rd level. It's great. Literally every time you are fighting someone bad in general, you should be using Fairy Fire. If you're fighting a boss, wait until they use their legendary resistances and then cast Fairy Fire, and for the rest of combat, everybody has advantages on them. Or if you if you want to use it to waste a legendary resistance, use Fairy Fire to, again, if your charisma score, because charisma is your spellcasting ability for all these spells. If your charisma score is decently high, you're going to have a decent spell save to DC, and Fairy Fire is going to be hard to escape from. And so it can be a great way. No boss is going to want to give advantage for the rest of the fight. It's just not a good idea. So you're going to waste a legendary resistance, which means later on, another character that needs them to fail the save is not going to have to worry about them auto-succeeding just because. So, yeah, Fairy Fire is just great. And then when you reach 5th level, you can cast the Darkness spell once with this trait and regain the ability to do so when you finish a long rest. So all of these are one-and-done abilities, but they're useful. Now, I mentioned before, Dark Vision doesn't allow you to see in magical darkness. So a lot of people see the Darkness spell and go, well, that's useless. I'm never going to use that because I wouldn't be able to see in it. Well, again, there's a lot of other uses for darkness. You can cast it on the enemies, so it forces them to either leave where they are or not be able to attack you. You can cast it in the sky and use it as a break for direct sunlight, so you don't have to worry about rolling disadvantage. There's tons of uses for it, so do it. And if you go Drow Warlock, you can get Devil Sight and be able to see inside the side of it, and then you're totally fine. So, yeah. All those super useful. So many different uses for them. And mixing them with your class abilities, whatever class you choose, can make you very formidable. The last thing they get is called Drow Weapon Training. Very similar to Elf Weapon Training, but they change up the weapons. Instead of long swords, short swords, and then the 2 different bows, you get rapiers, short swords, and hand crossbows, all of which are very popular in Drow lore, specifically the Forgotten Realms. So, yeah. Final thoughts. Again, elves are just crazy customizable. Again, the kind of base to the traits, dexterity is good for every single class because dex saves are really common against the spells. Dex generally tends to add to your armor unless you're wearing heavy armor. Like there's no real downside to dexterity. Dark Vision's good. Keen senses. Perception is always useful. And being resistant to being charmed is useful as well. Trance is cool, but it's not what people think. And then High Elves, your choice of your cantrip is really going to affect how you play the class. And it's going to be very interesting. If you do decide to go the rogue path, if you choose Green Flame Blade or the other Bladesinger thing, it adds on to your sneak attack damage. So rogues that take elven rogues that take that do crazy amounts of damage. So, yeah, definitely use that. And then Wood Elves, again, if you want to be a ranger, they are made for that, but you really should be a monk. The extra speed from fleet of foot is super, super useful, and then Mask of the Wild is great. And then finally, the drow. Use that drow magic a lot. There's so much you can do with it, and so many people just forget that it's even a thing. Anyway, this has gone very, very long, but that is all for me today. As always, if you enjoyed this, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, turn notifications on in the comments down below. What is your weirdest kind of off-perfect elf class combination? Any sub-race we've talked about here or not, combined with a class that normally wouldn't work, and what interesting things does that make you? Did you do a high elf barbarian? Let me know in the comments down below. Or do you want to? It doesn't have to be a character you've played, just a theory crafted. Anyway, again, that's all for me today, and I will see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.